Hi everyone, welcome to today. Excited to have Zan here. She's somebody that randomly, her and I got connected, and we have this random connection with my wife's brother and her husband. And anyways, it's fun. I really admire Zan. She's done a lot in her career, and I'm excited to just have a really frank conversation with her. I think it'll be of value. So, Zan, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I think I always like to start with like an awkward 90-second elevator pitch of who you are. So I'll let you kind of try to explain your story and who you are in 90 seconds.
Great, thank you. So I started my career in tech sales about 10 years ago. And after a few years in tech leadership, I decided to step away and start my own company, which wasn't the plan, but that's what ended up happening. I started my own recruiting firm to help other companies hire salespeople primarily. So that's what I've been doing the last 7 months, is how long I've been on this entrepreneurial side of the corporate ladder, maybe. And
Yeah.
it's been great. It's been a really great experience so far.
And you've been married for 10 years, 8 years. How long have you been married to Brandon?
Married for 7.5 years. I've got two kids, 4 and 2. And yeah, love being a mom. It's the best job I have.
Good. And you're in Utah, correct?
Huh? Yep.
So, yeah, the funny story is so Brandon Barkdale was my wife's brother's best friend. And so we didn't even know that connection until Zan and I started talking for another reason. But I just think it's a random small world that we all live in here. So welcome again. I appreciate you mentioning kind of the corporate ladder, because one of the first questions I want to start off with is, you started at Adobe a long time ago. I mean, 10 years ago, probably, and you grew quickly at Adobe and you were really successful. And then you moved to another company and you were really successful in another company, really successful, kind of climbing that title and in corporate ladder, what everyone wants to do. Eventually you're the VP and then had the option to be promoted to the CEO of that company. I'd love to kind of just hear though, throughout that climb, was it what you anticipated? Did you enjoy the climb? Do you miss the climb now that you're not in the climb? I would love to hear kind of a little bit more about that journey.
Yeah, good question. So I started at Adobe my junior year in college as a social media intern, which I hated social media at the time. I still don't love it today.
Yeah.
But I wanted to get into a great company, and that was the way in. So I took the open opportunity, jumped in, and immediately hopped on that ladder. And honestly, I loved it. I
Yeah.
love the corporate ladder. I love the game of promoting and maximizing your KPIs and networking like crazy, and I think that there's a lot of fulfillment that can come from that. And I
Yeah.
found I think one thing I always like to tell people, I had, let's see, I started in social media. I took a full-time role as a partner marketing manager. Then I made a career transition and moved over to inside sales as an SDR, then was a BDR, was the fastest person to get promoted through inside sales at Adobe, and took a 2 to 3 year expectation. That was how long the ladder is supposed to take, and chopped it down to 8 months. Went into field sales. Then I went into a sales strategy role. So it was 6 roles during about 6 years at Adobe, which is pretty crazy. And it wasn't all straight up a ladder, right? Some of that is
Yeah.
going up and moving sideways and up and sideways, right? And then I took a role outside of Adobe for the first time. But I feel like my corporate ladder is best visualized there
Yeah.
because of how much movement there was. And I loved it. I'm a very competitive person, which is why sales is a good spot for me. And so I viewed it as kind of this game I had to win. And,
Yeah.
and I won. I definitely was
Yeah.
winning at different
Yeah.
times. It didn't always feel that way.
Yeah.
Uh, but I think that I found a way to do well there. And yeah, some of me does miss that, honestly.
Well, I'm curious because then, moving into a founder's position, I think you look at like the validation and fulfillment, and it's totally different, right? You don't have exterior sources, a manager or leadership saying, "Hey, good job, we're going to give you a raise and a promotion," and it's all up to you, right?
Yeah.
Has that changed your sense of fulfillment? Do you feel like you're in a different position now? Has that been a challenge?
Yeah, very much. I would say that was probably the first big hurdle I had to overcome switching into more of an entrepreneurial role. Being in sales, obviously, I'm very motivated by money. I think the difference between me and maybe some other people in sales is that I care about the number, not in as much as like that allows me to purchase more or live a different life. I've honestly lived the same lifestyle since my first role at Adobe. But what I love about it and what was so important to me about continually getting raises was it's a validation. It's a sense of validation for if my salary is increasing, that means I'm doing well. And maybe my oldest daughter type A mentality, right? Like I need to know that I am doing excellent in my role. But the money, the number that followed was very important to me in terms of this is proving that I'm doing a good job, right? And especially in sales, in that jump from inside sales to field sales at Adobe, my salary doubled overnight. So I went from 80K to 150K in 8 months, which was pretty, that was my first real sense of like, oh, I'm doing well now. This means I'm successful. It didn't even like the money didn't matter, but it was just this validator. So then going from a VP of sales role where you can assume my salary was significantly higher, then to a founder role where I paid myself 40 grand last year, I think, which maybe don't even hear that on the podcast. I paid myself a very nominal amount this last year, and it had to be a mentality shift of how much money I am making does not indicate my level of success, nor does it indicate how whether or not this is the right career for me. I had to be able to step away from that kind of outdated, in my opinion, like maybe immature view and say, what matters to me today and what indicates that I'm being successful and where am I going to get my validation from now that I'm doing it on my own?
I think I talked to so many people and I've experienced it myself. If you look at how our society grows, we're taught that validation should be external, right? We're given grades from the time we're 5 years old that are determined by somebody else. And those grades define who we are. And then, you go from all the way through, elementary school, high school, college, etc. And it's still continuing that way. Then we jump into the corporate ladder and it's continuing on that same journey. And it takes a lot to, I think, break out of that mindset of like, well, wait a second, I should be defining what success looks like, and it shouldn't be based on what somebody else says, right? So I'm curious, in this journey of yours, would Zan 10 years ago that was just starting at Adobe, like, would she be proud that, or how would she feel about you being an entrepreneur? Was that any realm of the idea, or would she have been like, no, 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 take the promotion, take the next CEO role, take the next opportunity?
I think she'd be surprised. Shortly into starting, I guess, my full-time role at Adobe, I got married to Brandon, who is an entrepreneur. And so my role, my whole marriage so far has been salary, health insurance. Like that is right? That is my role in the family. I provide the money, I provide the stability, and he gets to he provides the high risk, high reward opportunity, which has been a really great combo for the two of us. So I think myself back then would be surprised to hear like, oh, you're going the not steady route. Also, it'd be surprising because I took so much pride and still do in providing for the family, right? And being that stable option. So I think she'd be surprised, but she would also be really proud to know that I took a leap that I wasn't comfortable doing. This wasn't an easy leap for me to make. And I feel like I'm maybe just now getting more comfortable with it. And it's a year later, right? So I think she'd be surprised overall.
Well, I always think it's interesting, like looking at ourselves through our past lens, you know what I mean? And in some ways, I just feel like there's so much change that happens from college through like the first decade of your career, marriage, family, all that stuff. So can you talk to me how maybe your motives have shifted, if they've shifted since that, 10 year ago, Zan is now looking at your life. What was she motivated by then? Was it money? or yeah, I would love to hear that.
It wasn't money in and of itself. It was just success. It was like this craving to prove myself. Like I've always had a big chip on my shoulder. And
Why?
uh, you know, I've always been a tom. I grew up competing in like I was a sponsored downhill longboarder at one time in my life and competed against only men. And so there was always this kind of there's that random girl who's here who doesn't
Yeah.
belong here, and women don't belong in this place, right? Whether that's at the skate park or somewhere else or snowboarding or whatever. And so I've always had this, I'm going to prove that I can do it better
Yeah.
than anyone else can. And
Did you have all brothers, or what encouraged that?
so I had a couple brothers younger than me, and then I had male cousins who
Okay.
were
You
best
were very
friends.
close with.
Yeah, super close with. And yeah, I think that was part of it. I also think I just was born with an unreasonable competitive streak inside of me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love that.
Yeah, so I think I've always kind of had that, like, don't underestimate me because I'm going to prove you wrong kind of mentality. So yeah, I had this need to prove myself. And if someone says no to me, then I'm like, it's game over. I'm going to absolutely prove you wrong, right? I remember my dream job actually was to get a role at LinkedIn. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I went on this marketing club trip out to San Francisco. We visited a bunch of different tech campuses, and that's when I was like, tech is where I want to be for sure. And LinkedIn was the place. And I remember my junior year, I didn't even get an interview for the internship. And so that became I'm like, okay, well, you're missing out, and I'm going to prove to you how. So I took that role. I pursued a role at Adobe, knowing that that logo would get them to give me an interview for a full-time offer, which it did. And I ultimately got a full-time offer and ended up turning it down for other reasons. But I think that maybe I was driven by that at the beginning, especially this need to prove myself and show that I can do anything. And that definitely progressed through a male-dominated field in sales.
Yeah.
And today, I definitely still have some of that. And I hope at some point I will grow out of that. Maybe?
Yeah. You want to grow out of it.
Think so. It's given me a lot of good in my life, right?
Um,
Pushed me in ways that, have helped me accomplish more than I would have without it, I think. But ultimately, maybe some of the ways I've shifted is becoming a mother changed everything for me. And my focus has gone from, my oldest daughter will be 4 in a few months. And my focus has gone from what's best for me and how can I prove this for myself and how do I show everyone else that I'm ruling the world to what's best for them and just a much more selfless mentality. And of course, it's still like a choice. I struggle with my own selfishness all the time, but they have brought out the best in me by far. And I think that this transition into entrepreneurship has really demonstrated that in that the reason I ultimately turned down a huge offer to another VP of sales role was seeing the lack of flexibility and saying, this would be awesome because this is a K OTE and I would be over a team of 80 people and this would be a huge jump in my career. But I also would be working 80-hour weeks and would never see my kids. And even though that would be such a huge external validator to prove everyone wrong who said I couldn't do it, right? It didn't matter to me more than what's best for my kids and my family and how do I show up the way that they need me to. And yeah, that might have been a long-winded answer.
No, I like that answer. I would agree with you that kids force you to prioritize things more than anything else I've ever done in my life, right? And in some ways, I have worked with a lot of people that see that as a disadvantage, right?
Yeah.
Because you have some single dude who sleeps at the office and he's wildly successful, and I will never be able to do that. But I think at the same time, Peter Drucker talks about this idea that if you create too much time, too much capacity, you fill it with stupid things. And if you are forced to prioritize, you end up saying what is absolutely most important. And in your experience, you said your family, your kids were far more important than a fancy title and more money. Was that, I ask a lot of people this question. Do you think that you're at a point because that's a lot of money to turn down, a great salary, great role, great opportunity. In some way, you had to say, what I have, who I am, is enough, right? And you're not looking for that. Is that something that you were able to do? Is that something you've done? Do you feel that way, or do you still feel that you're not enough in what you're pursuing there?
No, I feel very satisfied with my own
Mm.
life and this choice that I've made. I think that some of the shift has also gone from I loved working in corporate America, but a big part of you is working to make someone else super successful.
Yeah, yeah, it is.
There's nothing wrong with that. And I want to encourage everyone. I think that we glorify being an entrepreneur as well.
Yeah, I think we do.
Like, I wouldn't be successful in what I'm doing today without this 10 years of experience learning somewhere else, where I, especially like the people that you get to meet and learn from. On that team I joined when I went full time at Adobe, I was the youngest by 20 years on a team of about 8 people. So everyone there was at least 20 years older than me. And I learned so much from that group in particular. And anyway, my point is, yeah, there comes a shift where I realized, you know what? I think that I've reached a point where I can add a lot of value to other companies that I work with, but also to myself, and giving me this freedom and flexibility and the ability to really create equity in something that belongs only to me, that I can, there's just a lot more freedom in that and way more options. I think I can do just as well, ultimately, putting some time in this as I could in taking that role, especially because if you account in any of the value in terms of how I get to spend time with my family and my kids, like that is so much more impactful than what I could do at a company working 60 to 80 hours a week. So anyway, yeah, I think there's been a huge shift in that mentality for me. It wasn't easy, but I made the shift, and now I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I'm free of that restricting belief.
Do you, but I want to talk about a comment that you said, that you feel like your lifestyle is generally the same, regardless of how much money you've made. And I believe that that's like the greatest challenge to coming to that term, like that feeling of being enough and having enough, is that as we get older, we want more things, we want more this, we want different clothes, we want, we used to be okay with $30 jeans, now we got to have $150 jeans, or, whatever the journey is. We used to be okay with this food, and now we're not. And so I'm just curious, how have you kept your lifestyle measured, I guess, and maybe I'm sure it's different a little bit from where you started, but how have you been able to do that?
It's made me think of like probably the lowest point. We had invested all of our money into buying a really rundown duplex when we first got married. That's what we just put our money into.
Okay.
And I will always say too, like part of that came from a very generous wedding gift, essentially from my in-laws. So it's not like, I will never say I'm self-made. I think it's great. But we put our money into that instead of getting something really nice and cozy and new. And we lived on one side, renovated it while we lived in it, moved to the other and rented it out, and then lived in that side, renovated it, and then moved out. But at one point, we didn't have any working bathrooms because we were in the middle of renovating, and we did it all ourselves, right? So I remember I showered at Adobe for like 2 weeks instead of at home. And
Wow.
I remember one night we didn't have like the sewer running, and I really shouldn't even share this, but I remember climbing up onto the kitchen counter and literally peeing in the sink because I was like, I'm not leaving the house and driving to a gas station in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, right? And so I think that maybe those humble beginnings were very
Set the bar low.
it really set the bar, honestly.
Yeah.
Like I really don't care. And we've always moved into a house and fixed it up. And I think, maybe I'm sure so much of that is thanks to my parents and experiencing the highs and lows of entrepreneurship through my dad. We've lived in different circumstances all growing up. And I think that having exposure to, like I said, the highs and lows made me much more comfortable with whatever my living circumstances were. And I also married the right guy, right?
I was going to say, you and Brandon seem like you're a good fit there.
We're a really good team in that way, in that we do not care what we drive. We don't, like, of course I want to have a nice house and a nice space, but like my floorboards have been peeling up because we laid them ourselves. I'm looking at them right now for months. And I'm like, yeah, we can fix that next year. When we have more money, it just doesn't matter to me. So I would say if you can separate from short-term convenience or short-term comparison, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's a better word.
And shift this, like, just know that, hey, I'm investing in my future and that's what matters much more to me, then you're going to be happy. And honestly, I mean, objects have never brought happiness. They really haven't. Like, history shows that. So I'm glad that together, the two of us have decided, hey, this is how we're going to live, and we're okay with that.
Well, I think, if you think about your floorboards, they're coming up. If you went and every one of your friends had the same situation, their floorboards were coming up, you wouldn't think twice about it, right? Because it would be normal. And I think the challenge is that we go to somebody's house and they got a perfect floor, and now we're like, gosh, mine isn't good enough.
Yeah.
Instead of it being like, it doesn't matter what's good for somebody else. It matters like what's good for you. And I noticed, so my wife and I, we started in a trailer house actually, and we fixed it up. So we lived in this really rundown trailer house. We had to renovate the bathroom. We have similar stories. So anyways, and it was an adventure
right now.
Yeah. Anyways, so we had to renovate the bathroom as well. And it was an adventure. I think that as we made money, we did make mistakes, I think, of adding expenses, buying this or buying that. And I think every time I've learned the same lesson that you just said, objects don't bring happiness, right? And there are certain things that could drive happiness, right? Like having a pool is actually an amazing experience for me and my family. And even though it costs a ton more money, it's like we love so much every time we get to go out there, and that creates an experience, right? But there's this type of pool, and then there's this type of pool, right? And at some point you're like driving comparison. Well, my pool's not as big, or it's nice, or it's cool, or but is the experience impacted by having a nicer pool or not? And that's kind of the battle that you play, right? Like money can create really beautiful experiences, but at some point it's over the top, and it hits this like diminishing return where it's no longer adding that value to the experience, right?
Totally. And I want to emphasize too that, like, in some aspects of my life, this comes naturally. And I genuinely I've never cared. And so I still don't care. But then, of course, there's time, like, do I wish I drive a Porsche? Absolutely. Absolutely. I would love to drive a small 2-door 911, but it's also this mentality of knowing, like being able to consciously decide that is not going to bring me more than what I have today. And I think it's important to, like, I'm not trying to glorify this living beneath your means, nor say that it comes so naturally, right? There are certain things where it is truly a choice, and I have to say, that doesn't matter. I'm not going to do this. I'm going to do this instead, and like a cool vacation for my family or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Something.
Well, I think that most of us can resonate with, we don't have unlimited funds, right? And most of us can say, you could spend money on a floorboard or a vacation, and those are choices, right? And I think it's choosing how you spend your life is independent of comparison to peers. That's the challenge that I think that we are all going through, is defining that measure internally rather than externally by a comparison of some set of peers.
Definitely. Well, and honestly, that's a really good point. I feel very fortunate to have friends who have the same mentality as us.
I love that.
And so I don't have to experience a lot of that. I definitely experience it with peers or colleagues or, maybe more in the professional space. But in terms of like our close friends, we all kind of have the same, like, rugged
core values there.
Yeah, same core values. So I don't feel a ton of that. I think you can get a lot of that on social media, but maybe I think that comes with maybe just age too, maturity of knowing, like,
you've made the right decisions with your relationships, it sounds like, right? Like your husband, your friends, these are reinforcing your core values rather than threatening them, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think one thing to talk about too, you mentioned Peter Drucker
Yeah.
And this, if you create a ton of extra time, you'll fill it with silly things. At that moment when you said that, I also thought about Steph Curry and how he says that one of the reasons he believes he's a top performer is because, unlike many of his peers, he has a family. He has these core values that he comes home after a really bad game. He's like, yeah, it doesn't actually matter. Like, I'm with my kids and we're going to play silly games we're going to play. I'm going to sit down and have a good meal with them, and I'm going to spend time with my wife afterwards. And like, that helps you out from failures or successes in the workplace. And I think Steph is such a great example of this, because you say he's one of the best players in the NBA.
Yeah, he is.
And that's what he attributes that to. And so you can say, hey, I'm no longer like the single guy who can sleep on the floor and work 20-hour days. And in some ways, there's a lot of value in that.
Yes, there are.
Success there. But I also think there's a lot of success that comes from true prioritization and living outside of yourself that actually benefits you a ton in the workplace, like you said. So, yeah.
Well, it's like, and this is something I've learned a lot over and over again, every single walk of life is, I just had Johnny Hanna on here a few weeks ago, and he says that is a formula, right? Like, it is a formula of success to go and work, 100, 120, 140 hours a week, whatever it is, and just sleep at the office. I mean, Elon Musk has shown us that is a formula to success. And you just have to decide if that's your formula, right? Because we have enough examples of Steph Curry and other people that are doing it differently. And we have to recognize that there are lots of formulas. And I think I probably am aligned with the one that you're picking. And sometimes that may sound like that's the right one, but it's not that it's the right one. It's just, it's the one that we're picking.
No, it's the one that we're picking. And I think that my mom says this, there's pluses and bonuses to all paths, right? Yeah. And you just have to decide what is worth it for you. And I will say that data shows the more you invest in relationships, the happier you are going to be long term. And the people who are happiest at the end of their lives are the ones who have invested heavily in relationships and community.
Yeah.
And so there is no right or wrong path to success. But I do think it's important that if we do not zoom out and look at what am I building outside of myself, that ultimately you could choose the wrong path simply because you're not investing in things that are going to benefit you very, very long term, that are hard to see today.
Well, and I think that brings us back to, what are we defining as success, right? Do we want money? Do we want happiness? Do we want longevity? Do we want, there's so many areas. And so to your point, the happiest people that live the longest and the healthiest have the deepest relationships. And that Harvard study that you referenced is one of my favorite things.
Right.
And something I tried really hard to like implement or prioritize in my life, because it's a 100-year study proving that the happiest people, the ones that live the longest, the ones that are the healthiest, are the ones with the deepest relationships.
And so then I think it's a question of, how often are we prioritizing that today? And would a short-term metric of success, like if I choose to invest in that mentality, I am at risk of jeopardizing my long-term success rather than just my short-term. And so at some point, we all have to ask ourselves, is this mentality serving me? Right? Is my view of success or my passion for continually increasing my salary, right? Like, is that actually serving me and doing well, pushing me to do well long-term? And that was kind of the decision I had to come to not only when I started my company, but also when I chose to walk away from this CEO option at this smaller company, right? Before I left the company before that, my VP basically said, the risk in leaving now and going to try this, taking like a CRO, VP of sales role somewhere else, is that most likely you will fail, and that failure will be very public. Yeah. It was a comment where I was like, okay, that's not exactly what motivates me, but thank you for that. And so I felt in a lot of ways like a huge failure when I walked away from that next opportunity, saying like, man, I proved that guy right, because he said I was going to fail and he was right. I did, which was really, really hard for me to get over. And kind of decide for myself, like, was he really right? Is that what this was? And could I have controlled it? And, also, why do I care about this one person who's clearly not, it was so
Yeah,
many
yeah,
dumb things.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I came to the decision ultimately where I said, you know what? That mentality on income or outward success is not serving me. And why would I take this opportunity that ultimately is not going to be good for me or my family? This next one that may have proved me right? Like I can, that same chip on my shoulder, right? I can prove
Yeah,
you said I couldn't do it and I am.
yeah,
But
yeah.
like, what? I'm going to make a life decision based off of that type of comment or mentality. I ultimately had to just say, that is not what I want. Truly, it's not what I want. And what I do want, or what happiness would look like for me today, is getting to spend this summer with my kids for the first time. I've never had a summer with my kids, and this last one was the first time I did it. And I took Tuesdays and Thursdays with my kids every day during the summer, which was, truly the happiest I've ever been, was getting to spend my time with them and not worrying about so many other things that come into play. Anyway, I think it's important to ask ourselves, is my viewpoint serving me?
Uh,
And maybe it has in the past, but is it doing it today?
So my guess is you had anticipated that you were going to stay in kind of that corporate grind for some time.
Yeah.
How did you think you were how did you expect to balance that with your kids? Because it seems like you didn't anticipate being able to take Tuesdays and Thursdays to spend with your kids. And that was like a welcome surprise in this world of entrepreneurship. If you were still in corporate America, or if other people are still in corporate and they're still working, very busy jobs, how were you prioritizing your family in that?
So I think it was just important to have kind of ground rules between my husband and I. At different times, it's a give and take, right? Not even a give and a take. It's a give and give. And that sometimes it is your time to sacrifice. And let's put that in career terms. Sometimes it was my turn to put my career on the back burner, like I did when I chose not to go forward with my dream job at LinkedIn in San Francisco, right? Like, I decided that Brandon was the person I wanted to be with. And for his career, he had just opened a new ice cream shop right across from before we graduated. He was definitely geographically stuck in Utah and was so excited to pursue this dream that he'd had with his brother. And so that was my moment where I said, okay, I will sacrifice my career dream, knowing that in the future, it will be my turn where I can kind of go into this. And when I took this VP of Sales CRO role at my last company, that was his time where he said, great, I'll be at home with the kids right now. He was kind of in between roles and said, I'll be a stay-at-home dad for a certain amount of time so that you can work 70 hours, right? So I think it's one, being able to coordinate with your spouse and knowing that between the two of us, somehow we're going to make this work.
Yeah.
And I think that long term, I didn't know. I saw myself being a top executive at some tech company.
Yeah.
And that is the career I envisioned for myself. I honestly didn't know how it was going to work out, but I figured between Brandon and I that we'd make it work. Yeah.
I like that. Hot topic is, you're a female in predominantly male dominated industry, both as an entrepreneur and in sales. Do you believe that that's made it harder for you in your journey, or it's made it different? I'm sure it's different. I would just love to hear your thoughts on that topic.
Yeah, there's so much I could say here. I could take up an entire podcast talking about just this. Let me just share one anecdote.
Yeah.
I think that will kind of speak for itself. If you are a woman and you plan to we'll just get out of the being a woman in sales and how many things you have to overcome in that.
Yeah.
Let's just talk about motherhood. Yeah. For 9 months out of the year, right, I am carrying a child, which means my brain capacity is lower. My energy levels are significantly lower. My ability to focus is completely interrupted. The discomfort. I I remember taking sales calls. This is in early pregnancy. I was on the phone with a client. Fortunately, I had one of my reps on the phone also. And at one point, I had to go off camera, run to the bathroom, throw up, wipe my tears. You know how you throw up and you start crying? So wipe my face, come back in and turn on video within like a 4-minute span so that I could come back and keep leading the call. Right? Like stuff like that you just don't think of, or driving and having to pull over in the middle of the freeway because I'm vomiting on my way to work. Like, that's just the stuff that you don't think about. Or then think, shortly after maternity leave, coming back to the office and having to take breaks every 2 hours to go into a storage supply closet to pump, right? And then clean that up. That's a 30-minute experience, having to pump and then put the milk away and clean up and get back to work, like getting interrupted every 2 hours. Like, you cannot progress. It's so difficult managing those things. And then there's also, carrying the mental load of, I know that my son has his 2-month checkup, and I need to be there for that. And also I need to plan these meals and make sure, it's not just dinner cooked. It's, did I plan ahead of time what the meals were going to be? Go to the grocery store, prep the materials for the meal itself, and then actually cook it, right? Like, and that's speaking as someone who has an incredibly supportive, very actively involved spouse who actually takes on a lot of the like traditionally female, like, I never cook dinner. Brandon is always cooking dinner. But it's like, there's just so much you have to think about and do as a woman, especially as a mother, while you're working, that like, absolutely, it's so much more difficult. Not to mention the fact that like, then you're dealing with, I was gone for a few months for this maternity leave, and what does my employer think of that? And does he view me as valuable, knowing that I may have more children in the future? Will he promote someone else, a male colleague? Because even though I'm a higher performer, he knows that this guy's going to be here and doesn't need to go home at 4 o'clock to pick up their kids from school. Or it's dealing with constant biases and very real, honestly, setbacks to your career. Like, not many women, you have to think about, do I want to take a year off? Not a year off, but if I choose to have children, that is going to interrupt my career progress, and I'm still going to have to overcome that, right? And that's just on the motherhood side. So anyway,
I really appreciate your passion and just like your authenticity there. It's been a topic I've talked about a lot with my wife and other people, because I think for a long time I was of the opinion that, that it's equal opportunities, and I think, when you really look at that, what you just talked about, that's just a fact. Like, you have to overcome puking or 9 months of having all these issues, like, independent of anything else that somebody wants to say. Like, that in and of itself is a challenge that you have to overcome in order to participate in the workforce. How are other females going to do that? How are they participating? Is there enough support? What's your opinion on how that's going?
One of the most difficult things for women is childcare.
Yeah.
Coordinating childcare, especially like, think of single women who are raising their families and do not have a partner to support, supplement their income. One of the biggest issues I think we need to work on in this country, not to get political, but is going to be, what is our childcare support? What is our parental leave support like? And how do we improve that situation? Because either people are going to continue having less and less children in order to, because at today, most families need to have 2 working
incomes.
Yeah, you need 2 incomes. So either we're going to have to solve one of those problems, probably both, if we want that to change. Other women struggle.
Yeah, I know.
Drop out of the workforce despite very high levels of education or success or potential, because it is very difficult to do both. I think it is physically and mentally and emotionally difficult to manage both. And I'm not at all saying that one way is better than another, or that there is a way to that. I think that the right way is getting to have a choice, right? And we're based on society's structure. Women have less of a choice either way.
I agree with you.
Deep content here. Really deep conversations.
Yeah, no. It's one of those things that I think for me, I've last few years come to realize, I think. Growing up, I lived in a very traditional environment, and then our company, my first company that I ran, we were highly like college bros, and I think even just that culture of college broness, like, kept us from having that impact that a female could have had on our business. And we were highly disorganized in so many areas. And we struggled, I think, with that secondary opinion. And then if we did bring in a female, you have one female in the room of now like all these men. And that one female, like, how is she able to participate and offer that different perspective or insight or whatever? How is she going to get promoted if it's this boys club? So I think I've been a part of the boys club. And it's just interesting. It's interesting looking at that now with the lens I have. My wife has just helped me so much just to see how difficult it is for females to be successful. So I appreciate your thoughts there. I think we could keep talking for a long time. The last question I'll ask you is, and then we'll wrap up. I ask a lot of people this, as you've seen varying levels of success and you've gone from maybe like fighting for survival, fighting to, just prove yourself to now finding these moments of like you're happy with who you are. Do you believe your relationship with spirituality, with the deity, with God has changed at all? Going from praying for success to maybe now being in a different place. I don't know. That's just my question there. How has that evolved?
Great question. I will credit all of my success to God and my relationship with him, in that the only way I was able to accomplish so much in a short period was because of him and his guidance, and actively involving him in daily decisions, the big decisions in my career. We just talked about the throwing up story, right? Like, it is praying on my knees in that bathroom floor, saying like, please give me the strength and energy to keep doing this. Help me get back and be clear headed despite like how terrible I'm feeling. Little things like that, to God, help me transition my mentality and sense of worth to something different. Where do you want to be? Where do you need me to have an impact? Right. So I would say I've always had a desire to do his will and to be where God wants me to be, knowing that his plan is better than mine. I would say it's over time, I think I've gotten a little bit better at accepting whatever that is and being willing to adjust. So back when I made the choice to walk away from LinkedIn, my dream job, and take this full-time role at Adobe, that was still to this day probably the hardest decision I've ever made. I don't think it would be that hard today to do it, right? But back then, with what I had and what I knew, it was incredibly difficult. But I think that was one of the first times where I really just put myself in his hands and said, guide me, put me where you know is best, because I trust that your vision of my future is so much more than my own. And I think over time, like, my hesitancy in accepting his will has decreased significantly. So if I feel pulled to do something else, then it's less hesitation on my part and very much more like, okay, I've seen it. I know that your vision for me is so much bigger than my own. And so, yeah, I think that my message to anyone listening to this is try involving him, whatever you call him, whether it's the universe or Buddha or Abba, call him whatever you want, but choose to invite him into your career and into your work decisions, because he really wants to, he is so invested in that and wants to help you there. I think it's more a question of, are we willing to ask?
I agree with that. I like this. I like that concept. I think, for me, it's just the journey of figuring out how to involve God, how to keep God involved when maybe you are in places where you maybe don't feel like you need him as much as you used to, because when my business couldn't make payroll, you better believe I was praying like crazy. I was on my knees and just begging for some way. But when bank account is full and the business is successful and your family's doing well and your health is good, in those moments, I find that our relationship with God it can't be founded on, I need you, God. It has to be founded on like, my soul's at peace when I'm connected to God, right? When I'm connected to this divine entity, my soul is at peace and I can be my best self. And that connection is my pursuit, rather than, previously it was, help me out here. I need some help. And so it sounds like you've been pursuing that connection, and that's been a constant foundation for you in all of your decisions. And I think I really admire that.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I immediately think of what we've talked about today, right? Which is, what does success look like for us?
Yeah.
And how do we determine what that truly means versus maybe what society's natural view on success looks like?
Yeah.
How do I view my long-term happiness rather than just short-term, and
Yeah.
plan for that? And I think that it is easy to cut him out as soon as
Yeah.
things are going well, which is partially why, the scripture says it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. I don't think it's because when we do well, we like being rich, for example, that disqualifies us.
Yeah.
Not at all. I think it's that we turn away from him and we turn away from what happiness actually looks like.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, then it's an active pursuit of, all right, since I know money isn't a true measure of success, what is? And I can guarantee you, I definitely need him for the other stuff. If all of a sudden I'm doing well, I still need him for all of the other things in my life So anyways, yeah, thank you for sharing that and for being so open about your experience and successes and failures, right? I think that's so important.
Yeah, no, hey, Zan, I so appreciate your time. I love your perspective. I love your content on LinkedIn. So thank you for sharing your journey, your story with us. And thank you, I guess, is
It's
how I'll
been a
finish there.
privilege. Thanks, Dad. Really appreciate it.